Welcome. Only 7 minutes late. Bruchim Abim. I am Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. This is Rebbitzin Katrin, your virtual Rebbitzin. And after way too many weeks off, we are here with Day Drinking with the Rabbi. And if you can't see the deliciousness down here, Katrin, what are we drinking today?
A special pina colada.
Yeah, Paula colada, I think is the correct term for it. Differences would be, instead of just pineapple juice, it's, I was going to say live pineapples? No. We haven't started drinking yet either. This would be raw pineapples along with mango, pineapple, and orange juice instead of pineapple juice. And then it's a mixture of white rum and spiced rum. And then, of course, coconut milk. So it's the middle of the winter here in northern Germany. We needed a little dreams of a summer where maybe we could actually even go someplace. So with that, welcome. Pour yourself something. L'chaim.
Amen.
And it is quite lovely. And there are more shots in it than I'm going to name on camera. So by the end of this episode, it might get really, really interesting. Anyway, for those of you who just watched the podcast, I had a very bad cold and we could not broadcast anything because I couldn't talk. We tested negative day after day for COVID. And but yet it was actually a really, really bad cough. So who knows? Anyway, for all of those of you out there that are have gotten Omicron, which it looks like everyone's going to get, blessings, refuah shlema. Enjoy the podcast. We've got lots of questions today that we've picked up. I've picked out, I guess, 5 or 6 of, I think, some of the most interesting ones. And I don't know if we'll even have time for them all. Mm-hmm. But if not, keep on throwing in the questions, and we will continue every other week right now. We're going to go exchange week between when there's a new video that comes up, when there's a podcast that goes up, and of course every week I'll do my weekly Torah. So, all right, I wanted to start today with reading another small excerpt from my book, Gateways into Judaism, Volume 1. We look like we're still on track for getting this out in the next 2 to 3 months. So look on BeitVirtuali.org if you want to see the cover and a little bit more. I'm going to start putting some excerpts up probably in the next 4 or 5 weeks on the website. And then this will be available on Amazon in hardcover and quality paper. So that's very exciting. And also on Kindle. And I think that one of you out there, if I know that you usually watch these podcasts, there's been a lot of people who've said you actually do need to do the Audible version of this. So if you're watching, you know who you are. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to have a chat because you are the right person and you know who you are. All right. So this is actually chapter 3, chapter Gimel of the book. And it's the very beginning of it. And it's entitled, So What Are They Lying? And it kind of, for those of you new to BeitVirtuali, since we've actually had a slew of new subscriptions to the YouTube site in the last few weeks. Thank you for those of you who are joining us. Really grateful for you. This will give an idea of kind of what we're about here in the post-denominational traditional Judaism world. So what are they lying? I grew up with the absolute conviction that the Torah says, "Thou shalt not lie." As a U.S. American Gen Xer, I'm assuming that this was as ubiquitous to my generation mates as John Hughes movies, and don't make that face or it'll freeze that way. Of course, Torah says nothing like, "Thou shalt not lie." In this case, it's not just that the English is inadequate. It is, contrary to at least one really, really bad paraphrase, not at all what is written. The Hebrew reads, Lo ta'aneh v'recha et shaker. Lo means no. Doesn't mean thou shalt not. Lo means no. Ta'aneh means you answer, where answer in this context is a technical term in a legal process. In other words, if you're testifying as a witness. Ve is the preposition required in this formula for the previous verb, and recha, usually translated as your neighbor, is probably best understood in this case as your fellow citizen. Ed is contextually your testimony, and shaker is a lie. Most of us that have engaged in Judaism or Christianity, as we have gotten older, have learned that the most common English translation from this utterance in Exodus is, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." But a child probably does not understand the subtlety, and if we had "thou shalt not lie" as a damning truth drilled into us in childhood, the damage is already done. The translation from child's mind into adult subconscious is, anyone that lies to me, although of course I can lie when I deem it necessary and can justify it, is bad. The act of lying is unjustifiable when it's done to us. The point that the Torah is making is clearly a very specific type of lie, one that damages the legal or civil standing of a fellow citizen. If someone brings charges against another, our obligation is not to lie. This might seem obvious, but the authors of the Torah are trying to epitomize in the least amount of words the moral obligations to the religion of the Jews, the ethical obligations to the civil society of the Jews, and the basic narrative reasons why these rules are valid and binding. Being religiously obligated when I'm faced with a friend in need of reassurance who does not truly look good in that Hawaiian print shirt is not the same planet of moral resonance as damning someone in a court of law, or for that matter, in a public forum such as social media, where my false witness could lead to the loss of my livelihood. Both acts fall under the definition of lie, but we cannot deal with the complexity of how religious texts come to be without understanding how big the category of lie is, and that there is no black and white here. Yet as many of us were legitimately, linguistically and morally programmed regarding falsehood, it makes looking at the authorship of religious texts difficult. Take, for instance, a dramatic such moment in 2001. Rabbi David Volpe caused a bit of a sensation when he suggested to his conservative congregation in Los Angeles that Exodus had never happened, at least not in the way like it had been described in the Torah. He had recently read a book called The Bible Unearthed by two archaeologists, both Jewish, and the basic thesis of the book was neither new nor unique to that volume. In the prologue, the authors wrote, "The historical saga contained in the Bible, from Abraham's encounter with God and his journey to Canaan, to Moses' deliverance of the children of Israel from bondage, to the rise and fall of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, was not a miraculous revelation, but a brilliant product of the human imagination." At least one reviewer described the books as recommended, quote, "for anyone that liked to be wakened in the morning with a spray of cold water." But this really should not have been so. The stories in sacred books are seen as history not because there is any objective reason to believe that the events are historical, but rather because so much of our ego as individuals and cultures requires the stories to be true. The literal nature of the Judeo-Christian tradition has been called into question in academia now for well into the 2nd century, with chips in the facade for hundreds of years before that. And the reasons that this information does not percolate into the everyday teachings of Sunday schools or bar or bat mitzvah training should be obvious. There's generally no perceived win for the religious community. If I, as a congregational rabbi, teach that Exodus never happened, regardless of the subtlety of my argument, what will generally be heard is, your or our tradition is a lie, which will then be followed by the logical thought, then why am I paying membership dues? So, a little more hint into what's coming out in a couple of months. And with that, anything you would like to say, or are you just going to jump into the questions?
Why did you want to read us something from, like, just about exactly the specific aspect of the book?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's marketing. I want to start spreading the word. I know that there's some buzz in some circles starting to talk about it, which is very exciting to me. And I've got a few people who have agreed to do blurbs, which is very exciting as well. And so it's not only marketing, but for me personally, some of you don't know me at all, and I love the fact that the channel's getting bigger. But the last years for me has been a challenge, as I have decided to transition my rabbinate from a congregational rabbinate to this online forum, but especially to writing, and I'm working on a lot of writing projects right now. And so part of it is a test for me. What are the reactions out there? Some of the early proofreading that's being done of the book has made me think of some of a lot. And this is an early part of the book, as much anymore other than in the BeitVirtuali classes. And so, yeah, I'm excited. I wanted to share. I'm proud of this, and I cannot wait. I believe Katrin knows I'm working every day, hour after hour, to make sure I get this out to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, but as you just said, you work with a lot of passion and a lot of joy, and it's, yeah.
I feel like a very good version of myself as I'm writing this.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for that reflection, by the way. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really exciting and like it, unfortunately.
Nope, there we go.
Okay, I think
In and out.
we are back.
So as usual, there's some times
no.
where there should probably be audio, even if the visual cuts in and out. So,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, well, I think we just continue and don't let this distract us too much.
Yeah.
So, I think you can leave your glasses on.
We're good.
Yeah, I just thought I'm gonna read the comments and then you can reflect on them just as they were delivered to us.
Okay. And this is now several weeks worth of comments on different things. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So the first comment was a comment to our podcast, Love the Sinner, Hate the Sin. And so maybe if the writer of the insensitive tweet can show that he, oh God, I'm reading like it. Sorry. So maybe if the writer of the insensitive tweet can show that he had been aware of the hurt he might cause, he certainly would not have sent it. Then those whom he has wronged may be able to stop feeling the need for revenge and the break of the cycle.
There is a lot to unpack in the question, I think, because there is a type of a mystical thing that's being talked about here. And on the situation overall, what I always try to say is I don't think any of us ever wants to be judged for the worst 160 characters we've ever uttered in our lives. Mm-hmm. And, this is Christianity gets a few things very, very right. And one of them is, he who is without sin be the first one to cast the stone. I think that whenever we do social media pile-on, and it's happened a lot, I've seen a few pile-ons in the last year, where the person who was piled on, then all of a sudden their Twitter feed was gone into, and then they ended up losing their job because come to find out we're human beings and we say stupid stuff. And if in this atmosphere where so many things that we say are recorded, there's a very prominent public speaker right now who, when asked how their career will end, says over and over again, I'm going to say something stupid. I spend too many hours on camera. I'm going to, I think as I talk, and I'm going to someday say something that is indefensible because that's what we as humans do. And so I think the first thing to think about in that one is just how we judge people. But that's not really what the question comments are. That first part, I think, is one of the most beautiful things in the world, and that is the mystical idea that we can change one type of sin to another. So there's three types of sins. We have chet, avon, and pesha. So chet is unintentional. Traditionally, this is how it's taught. Avon is intentional, and pesha is a rebellion against God, and those are the ones that you rip the fabric of the universe. That's the murdering someone level. And what Rabbi Lord Sachs was saying was, the process of teshuva, where we go and we recognize that we've done something wrong. If we've done something like avon, we've deliberately sinned against someone, the awareness of that can reduce the severity of that. If there was, let's say, a heavenly checklist on who's been naughty or nice. And that's, Rabbi Sachs is very sophisticated in his theology, so he's not saying it like that. But I think that there's something really powerful psychologically that's captured here that's really worth highlighting. And that is, and you can look at it at a very mystical level or a practical level. So the practical level or the mystical level is an interesting psychological exercise that sometimes happens with certain practitioners of cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's where, and this is really good for people with good active imaginations, it's where you imagine yourself going back and talking to an early version of yourself. And maybe you don't so people who imagine conversations from before or imagine situations, and some people have that imagination and some people don't, but people who do and are really good at this, what Jung called active imagination. Let's say you send yourself back as an unrecognizable person, like a classmate or a foreign exchange student who's coming in that, befriends you, and you have a conversation with yourself from 20 years ago that helps pass on the wisdom that you have learned today into an earlier version of yourself. And if that sounds really silly, it only sounds really silly because we don't necessarily understand that we don't have an objective view of ourself whatsoever. anything that happened in the past that's affecting us today. It's not the objective thing that happened. It's our version that's in our memory. So there are times, give a quick example. There was someone in the early ages of internet who I think follows this channel, who really, really early computer age. We had my very first online romance when I was 20 or 19 or something like that. And then I was very immature and I got scared and I did the version of ghosting, which is why whenever I talk about ghosting, I say, when I've received it, I, karmically deserved it because I did it. And this is a ghosting situation. And I came in contact with her on Facebook 25 years later. She has 3 kids, very happy. And I apologized. I went and I said, listen, I did this and it was horrible. And this is one of those things that had kept me up at night. I felt horrible. It was gnawing at me. When I would think of how I'd been treated that I hate, I would then think of this incident. And I was in tears when I was typing this out in Messenger. And she came back and said, I forgot that even happened. Either way, thank you for saying that. You're forgiven, but it hasn't played a role in my life and it's completely fine. And so the reality of what had happened hadn't had the effect that I thought. I made a mistake that I needed to correct. It was the wrong thing to do. But acknowledging that was wrong, going through the process of teshuvah, all of a sudden the memory is now different. I no longer carry inside of me the memory of hurting someone. I carry inside of me the memory of making a stupid mistake that I've corrected for. And that's what Rabbi Sachs is talking about. It is an incredibly practical thing. We go back into the past, and the act of doing teshuvah changes the entire nature of the original thing. Not doing teshuvah changes the nature as well. It makes it worse and worse and worse, or we cut that part of ourselves off so we don't have to listen to that voice. Either way, it's like someone burns their hand and doesn't go to the doctor to get it treated. It's going to get worse until all of a sudden you're forced to go to the doctor. So I think that point that Rabbi Sachs made is, and I've never been even close to as eloquent as him. And if you don't know who Lord Rabbi Sachs is, he's got tons of stuff on the web. Just listen to him. And this is one of those things where I think more non-Orthodox people have respect for how he approaches Judaism through the lens of Orthodoxy than any other single Orthodox leader, other than maybe also of blessed memory Adin Steinsaltz, who a lot of people knew through Limud. So that's the first part of that one. The second part is the dealing with the maybe if that person had gone back and realized it themselves, and the person who were offended by that tweet, would also feel that was released. And I guess what I would say to that one is, boy, that's the ideal. One of the problems with the piling on and the destruction that we have in social media is there's not a forgiveness system. Because if someone's caught doing something wrong and they ask forgiveness 30,000 times and that's heard by 3 billion people, if the 3 billion first person hears it for the first time, then that will then be retweeted out again to a new series of followers, and that's repeated over and over again. So the system as we have it right now, where, and again, sometimes very awful things that are said on social media, we don't have a system in the current collective consciousness of teshuvah. That's the issue. You can be as legitimately sorry, you can truly have realized that you said something stupid, and if that message has not been not only broadcast to and heard by everyone on the face of this planet and processed, then the chances are that once again you'll be in that position. And so you end up having to do the opposite for survival, and you step out of the world of ethics and morality and that say, I'm done talking about this. And then that leads to other social media issues. So boy, oh boy, what you've said is the absolute ideal. This is one of the reasons we wanted to do that podcast on forgiveness to begin with, because I don't see this happening anytime soon. I've even recently, I think, been embroiled in this a little bit, and it is just brutal and awful. And if you don't say the perfect thing in 2020 hindsight, then it's immediate, and it's actually, it's awful. So from your mouth to God's ears, as it were, I wish that were the case. I think it's not the case. I think the reality we have to live with is when we say something stupid, we will pay a price. And then if we have fortitude, we'll get through to the other side. And the people who actually choose to know our intention instead of what they want to hear will remain in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, one of the issues that the intention is oftentimes not relevant these days. And people just make assumptions rather than asking questions, like instead of ghosting someone or canceling someone, one could just ask a question. What do you mean by this? Can you elaborate? Especially I think this goes with Twitter, where you have 140 digits and people just, throw something out in 140 digits, and this can never be enough to explain yourself, your intentions and your motivations and so on.
I mean, we're missing in the reason teshuva is so powerful is most Jewish law, most of our mitzvot are designed around a system to keep human beings living in a small collected situation from tearing each other apart. It's a lot of the things that we think of as silly, a lot of things that have been attacked in more modern times as being merely ritualistic byproducts of a time that doesn't exist anymore. That is not only not necessarily true, because we don't always know the purpose of something, but we don't live in the same situation. So we develop some things that maybe only work in a shtetl, and we develop other things that have universal wisdom. And the process of teshuva is a dialogic process by which we are obligated to make thorough inventories of who we have damaged and then make amends for that. And when all of a sudden you are talking to potential audiences of millions of people, then we have no control over how our intentions are seen if they're not asked. And quite frankly, just about every word I say has the possibility of offending someone.
Sure.
And so that situation, we don't have a brilliant halakhic answer to that. We don't have, it's this type of interaction with media started 2 seconds ago. And, our halakha has been evolving for a couple thousand years. And so teshuva has not yet caught up to how social media functions, to how this larger audience happens. And the implications of this are that we don't, as human beings, have the psychological makeup to know what the results are going to be. I would like to think I have thick skin. It's absolute BS. I have incredibly thin skin. And whenever I'm misunderstood, I feel it. It feels incredibly painful. And whenever I'm not asked about my intentions and it's just assumed, it's incredibly painful. And then here I am doing an enterprise online. And I sit there and think, oh, let's get more subscribers. Let's get more members of BeitVirtuali. And what that also means is a higher probability that someone's going to hear one of these podcasts and say, ooh, let's go ahead and retweet this to my 5 billion followers and take this person down because, boy, oh boy, did he just say that thing? And that is something I've intellectually come to terms with. If it were to ever happen, I think it would be devastating beyond belief. So, practical versus theoretical.
Another thought that came up, and it's probably completely different, or subject change for like a little bit. I was just thinking about sociopaths.
Okay.
And because you talked about tshuva, and we also talked in the previous podcast, or it wasn't the previous one, in one of the previous podcasts about love the sinner.
That was the last podcast, yeah.
Love the sinner, oh God. Love the sinner and hate the sin.
Right.
So, is there anything... I'm just thinking about it because once a sociopath approached me and apologized almost like 5 years after this person didn't behave in a way that they should have, and because this person made tshuva, I accepted it and was thankful, and then I was trapped again with this person because I trusted them and believed in a change, and then I realized, no, it's just a psychopath who wants to control people.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what my question is, but it's like we always kind of believe in that the person who makes tshuva has a positive intent.
Yeah, yeah.
That it's about healing, and when it's, but is there, like, do the sages, or do you know if the sages discuss something like what is with people who are ill-meaning and try to just trap you?
The answer is absolutely yes, and there's not only discussions at the Talmudic level; those are also interesting discussions in Hasidic Judaism on that one, because Hasidic Judaism, especially the Admor Zakan, so the founder of the Lubavitch Hasidim, in his magnum opus in the Sefer Tanya, Likudei Amrim, he starts off by saying that this book, and by projection, books of Jewish law and spirituality are only for certain people. And before that sounds really awful, what he's talking about is there are some people, and I think he breaks into 6 categories, not the expert on this one, this is going from memory many years ago, but the 3 primary categories is you've got the Rashi'im, you've got the Tzadikim, and then you've got the Benunim. So the Rashi'im are purely evil people, who I have met one purely evil person my entire life, and I'm going to say almost nothing more than that, other than the person died about 30 years ago, but the person had begun on a very classic path to serial killer with mutilating animals and that sort of thing. So, I mean, and my experiences with this person growing up were terrifying. And so that's when I hear something like Rashi'im, that's what I relate to. And then the Tzadikim, I may have met a tzaddik once. I'm not sure. That's a sort of thing, and that's maybe a discussion for a different day, because I think talking about what a tzaddik actually is a fascinating conversation within non-Orthodox perspectives as well as Orthodox. But the Tanya says, listen, this book is not for people who are all evil, because they're not going to care. It's not people for people who are all good, because they don't need to do this work. It's for the rest of us, Benonim, the people who are in the middle, who are capable of atrocity and are capable of the greatest good. And by the way, if there's anyone out there who's not a tzaddik and who's not a Rashi'im, and you think I'm not capable of atrocity, you're the person who will commit atrocity. That is the first rule of understanding, and this is Jungian psychology, but this is what the entire idea of the shadow is all about. Until we've wrestled with the fact that we have a dark side, until we have a shadow, if we've never wrestled with it, we are the ones who will commit atrocity. So therefore, realize how great that potential is inside of you, and then all of a sudden you can project. And this is the entire idea in Judaism, where we don't discount the Yetzer Hara. We don't say get rid of the evil inclination. We say you need to have the evil inclination. When I teach kids, the thing that I always say to them is, all right, the Yetzer Hara, Yetzer HaTov, this is kind of how it works. The Yetzer Hara starts off when you hear someone play cello, and then you say, oh man, they play really well. Now, I'm jealous. I'm upset. This has made me mad. This has made me uncomfortable. If you carry it through, then the wrong way to go is, so I'm going to burn their cello. What we're supposed to do is to say, I'm going to practice my instrument more, right? So we've actually had this jealousy as something that's fed our potential creative process. And if we decide that we're all good, and given the worst situations, we would all be saints. No, absolutely not. Not possible. And I have very little tolerance for someone who says, I am not capable of atrocity. Yes, you are. We all are. Both of us are. We are capable of it by being acknowledging of that then. So a sociopath may acknowledge that they're capable of atrocity, but they won't care. And obviously there's a spectrum from sociopath of people who are closer to psychopathy versus people who can pass in general society and that sort of thing. And so step number 1 is to understand, when we talk about normative halacha, how we behave, we're talking about the people who have in them the light and the darkness. And so there's a lot of how we're required to behave to others for someone who is not capable themselves of returning them, that we are exempt from that sort of behavior. Everyday practical, not the big ones, we're still supposed to understand that they're human. If a psychopath commits a crime, we're not to then put them in the worst forms of torture and that sort of thing, and understand that 1 to 5% of all populations are psychopathic. Most societies that trims down to about 3%, because tribes will then recognize and suppress those tendencies within their midst, and there are people who are sociopaths and psychopaths that rise to very effective places in society, and that's channeled. There are people who are obviously very, very destructive, but 1 to 3% of the population isn't a serial killer. So, and if anyone doesn't believe these numbers, this is very common psychological information. If you don't believe me, let me know, and I'll put a paper up in the notes or that sort of thing. But this is pretty commonly cited stuff. So those are when we deal with halakha, we're always dealing with all these different, well, think of this, then think of this, then think of this. So normative halakha for people who are capable of reacting morally to you and ethically to you as you are to them. Specifically with teshuva, we add one more layer to that, and it is the wisdom of Judaism that I don't think is always understood, and that's if someone asks for forgiveness of you, you're not required to give it to them. Now, what I always teach people from a counseling standpoint is you probably should, because the energetic burden of rejecting forgiveness then will tear you apart in your own way, because then we're living through our traumas instead of living through our overcoming of the traumas, and those are two very different looking lives. But at that point that happened, if you knew that they were not capable of actually apologizing, then you've got a different series of choices, but you were acting in your moral best, and then you learned a second level of a lesson. You know, there's a lot of people who we might think are sociopathic who may or may not be. They just have personalities that we really don't like. In this case, since I have an idea of what you're talking about, and I agree with you on that one, I think that you were acting as the best version of you that you could. And hindsight is 20/20. If, however, the person were to come to you a second time after several more years of, in this case, what was abuse, and say, you know what, I realized what I did and I'm sorry again. At that point, from a most Jewish standpoint, one could say, you know, I hear the words you're saying. I'm going to recognize your humanity, but I'm not going to accept this because I actually do not believe that you are sorry, or you don't even have to give a reason, but you do not have to accept that. So that would be the only situation where I would ever recommend that one wouldn't accept it, because we truly do face lifelong lack of life force in us if we're attaching all of our life force to everything that we haven't forgiven yet. And, you know, we're exhausted all the time. Why? You know, just everyone close your eyes right now and think, how many people did I wake up this morning mad at? Well, every one of those bits of energy you've attached onto that anger is energy that we don't have to live our lives. And since most of us are tired or sick or burnt out or overwhelmed, we need all that we can get. And that person who hurt us when we were 12, and I'm not making fun of that because I had some horrible things happen to me that I was 12 that I had to deal with. Those people who hurt us at 12 and I'm now 50, if I'm actually giving them energy still, I got to tell you, my body needs that energy. I need that energy. Generally speaking, my advice is you should accept the forgiveness. But in that situation, yeah, Judaism has some subtlety, which is nice. Judaism is never going to really throw us into the lion's den, as it were. Daniel notwithstanding.
Yeah, but then we have to, find other tools to then, I don't know, reconcile with ourselves.
Yeah.
Or however you put it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, then instead of dealing with the person, then we go with the process of dealing with it ourselves. And again, Judaism has the beauty of multiple rituals. We have a ritual coming up in a few months called Passover, where we talk about what are the things that we are enslaved to. And slavery is both literal and metaphorical. And if we are enslaved to background hatreds, things in our past, things that we're shackled to because we can't get over, then we go through the process of what it does mean to move from the slavery into freedom. So we've got these metaphors that come over and over again. And then don't forget, in the process of Teshuvah, the first day of the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah, then has the ceremony of Tashlich. And what is Tashlich? Tashlich is literally casting away from us. And there's, the ceremony itself is specifically the process we've gone through in the month of Elul, but all of our rituals have a multiplicity of meanings that we can assign to them. And Tashlich is an opportunity. We have all these rituals that we just kind of shrug our shoulders and do. All these rituals are psychologically true with a capital T. And Tashlich is, I've literally gone through the exercise of every one of those breadcrumbs the night before. I assign a name to them. This is the anger I have for this. I am choosing to let this go. And then putting that in my pocket in my jacket the next day. And then I go out to do Tashlich and I pull out the 50 crumbs that are in there. Hopefully only 5 or 10, but 50 sometimes. and I pull them out, I've already charged them. And I know it feels like an irrational magical system, but there's a lot of, the ability to, within hypnotherapy, there's a lot of different ways that we do this, but to be able to say, this represents this. Our minds are powerful, and I am now casting this away from me. Tashlich. So we have ritual, and that's the answer to the question. If we don't have the relational thing we can do, and Teshuvah is a ritual as well. It's a relational ritual. But if the relational ritual lets us down, our tradition contains within it other ritual. And sometimes that ritual is probably left in the past, and that would be things like kapara with a chicken. I think we probably don't need to do that anymore. But we replace that with sticking coins in a sock, and we can still do. Why would we do such a thing? Because we have often hurt so many people that when we actually start asking forgiveness, it's hard for us to believe that someone could ever forgive us. Why do you think we have kol nidre to begin with? We've got 3 respected elders of the community standing up there with a Torah scroll. They are a Beit Din. They are a judge in front of us, telling us, as the Chazan or the Rabbi or the Shlech Tzibur or the Cantor soloist is singing kol nidre, is saying, that work that you've done was valid. So the answer is ritual, and our rituals, I think at our own peril, we think are silly and something for the past. They're the only things that I think have probably kept me functioning to this point in my life, other than you.
Thank you for saying that. No, but I think it's really, I also always forget that Tashlich is a really nice moment to cast away this the negative feelings or unresolved things and get closure.
I've seen people made massive life changes through Tashlich, and you and I have done this before, and it's made a huge difference. It's another discussion for another day. There's a difference between the things in the past and the things that you're currently going through, but that's a discussion for a different day.
Yeah.
Okay. One question in 45 minutes. Go us.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Oof. Let's talk about something more positive.
Okay. Forgiveness is positive, but yes.
Yeah, sociopaths not so much.
Yeah, there we go. Yes.
So you also received a comment on one of your BeitVirtuali classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought maybe it would be good to address it here.
Okay.
So this person wrote I was particularly intrigued by, quote, "Help me to see me as you see me," unquote. Wondering if this is a well-known concept. So I Googled it. I only found Christian references, all seemingly trying to convince me that God loved me just how I am and not to worry about anything. I don't think this is what you had in mind.
No.
It would be nice to hear more about this aspiration and why it might apply particularly to prophets.
Great. Okay, let's unpack a few things. The first one is, if you are shocked that there are classes that BeitVirtuali offers, they are currently accessible to all members at all membership levels of BeitVirtuali, and we are now just finishing up. This Sunday will be the 3rd of a 3-week class on demystifying the prophets, and I have had so much fun doing this one.
Yeah.
So be looking, if you have not liked my Facebook page for BeitVirtuali, then make sure you go on and look for BeitVirtuali on Facebook, because I always update education there, and then always under adult education on BeitVirtuali.org. You can see that stuff as well. So we will be doing a whole bunch of one-off classes over the next few months, then go back to a couple, 3 or 4 session classes. So this was in the context of the first prophet class, where I was trying to expand our view of what a prophet is, because we tend to have this vision of either a Moses-like or a Jonah-like or an Ezekiel-like prophet. So Moses being the person who talks directly with God and therefore is able to give us law. The Jonah type, the person who is dealing with not wanting to be called to the prophecy, but also contains a social element, calling an entire nation to repent. a nation that he didn't like and therefore did not want to go. And then Ezekiel, the mystical guy who has a vision of the throne room of heaven and a chariot, a vision of the chariot coming down from heaven. Sorry, Isaiah, throne room of heaven. And the weirdness factor going on there. And I wanted to expand out in this class the idea. And one of the things that I like to teach about prophets is that they are people who have gone through the process that we talked about earlier of radical self-individualization, individuation. There it is. The polycolata is absolutely hitting now. And so they've actually looked at themselves in the mirror, as it were, and gone through the process of saying, I am capable of profoundly hurting people. And so it's not all about who's hurt me. It's about how much I've hurt others as well. It's the recognition of the different influences that we have in us, the anima, the animus, and the shadow, according to Carl Gustav Jung. And so this idea of praying to God, help me to see me the way that you see me. Yes, that is absolutely, and I didn't even think of it in class, that is absolutely used in pop culture, in kind of meme culture, on feel good about stuff. That's not where it comes from, but unapologetically it does come from the monastic tradition, and there is no monastic tradition in Judaism. There are two versions of it in Judaism that I'll get to in a second, but in the monastic tradition, there's something that is referred to by people like James, Christian mysticism. I think Swedenborg talks about it as well, but also Hildegard von Bingen. And people who've gone into that deep place, even people who've had the stigmata, which I don't really want to talk about that. That's out of my area of expertise. And I don't want to really upset a lot of Christians by talking about it. But people who have gone through incredibly difficult visions of being assailed by enemies after they've asked a question like that. And the idea is if you actually attempt to see yourself as you actually are, so as God sees me as a metaphor, most of us do not pray that prayer because we don't want to be seen as we are. And when we look up and see, oh, God loves you, that sort of thing. Okay, that's a specific sort of language that I don't use. That's the idea of the way that I am is fine as I am. And the answer in Judaism is yes and no. We wake up every day with the prayer and say, Eloheinu shemashna tatabita horahi. Oh God, the soul that you've given me is pure. That's an awesome prayer. And it's psychologically much more powerful than believing when we wake up every day that we are filthy from sin, for example. So that sort of prayer is powerful. But at the same time, we constantly have to strive to better ourselves. That's why we have the holidays. That's why we have Teshuvah. That's why we have Passover. That's why we constantly have the questions that we should be asking ourselves, because the nature of who we are is we are a reflection of divine reality. That's beautiful. But if we think that we've got no work to do, then we haven't been paying attention. Every single one of us has something that we need to work on, most likely a lot of things that we need to work on. So you put all those things together, and if we are not aware, I know I've said this a billion times, for every person that I am in therapy because of, someone's in therapy because of me, right? If we haven't actually come to understand that in a real sort of way, to understand that every time I say, I am a victim of someone else, I have victimized someone else as well. That's why we have. That's why we try to have sympathy with Pharaoh in our Passover Seder. We don't just say, "Yay, they were all killed." We take the drops out of the wine so that we hope that the judgment is slightly less on them. We recognize the humanity. So sometimes we are the Hebrew people escaping slavery, and sometimes we are Pharaoh who is keeping people in slavery at a metaphorical level. But how many of us want to see ourselves as Pharaoh? And so what if we were to go to sleep one night and say, you know what, I really want to see myself exactly as I am. And that night I have a dream and I have stepped into the metaphor of the slaver and I'm whipping someone. Because that's exactly how dreams work. It's our subconscious attempting to communicate to us something that our conscious is not yet ready to deal with. And we ask that question, and all of a sudden we see something that is so horrible. I don't think that there's a human being that I know that would be happy to see that image in their own subconscious. And what happens is, if I look in the mirror and say, is that who I am? Most of us are going to say, that's not who I am. But the monastic tradition is you then face that, and then you face it again. And then all of a sudden, all you see is how horrible you are, which is not the end point, but the point is to go through that. And so that's that prayer that was often prayed in the monastic tradition. Now, the Jewish tradition of that, we call that devakut or devakas, depending on how much Ivris versus Ivrit you speak. And that's the idea of cleaving with God. Oftentimes, this is also called Torah is the mirror. The very introduction to Lawrence Kushner's God Was in This Place has a beautiful story about the mirror in the Torah. So just get the book and read it. You should have it anyway. But the idea of devakut is that we cleave to God. Now, what does cleave mean? It's one of those words that, and the way that I first heard cleave described to me, and I love this one, is if you were to take an infinitely thin diamond saw and then take a slab of granite and then cut that slab in two, and then you've got two pieces of granite and put it back together because you had an infinitely perfectly thin saw, you would not see that it was apart. So two things, when you can't tell that they're apart anymore, that's what cleaving means. So what does it mean to cleave to God? Well, what it means is to no longer have things that separate you from everyone else. Well, what separates you from everyone else? You're you and I'm me, and it's essentially you're you because you can do something for me, and I'm me because I'm the person who needs something done for. In other words, you're an object and I'm the subject. And so, not with you, of course, but coming to the understanding that I'm not the center of the world, and you are equally as bound to humanity and equally a product of heavenly reflection as I am, also means that I come to terms with every single time I've treated you as anything other than that. And when that becomes our primary consciousness, that's cleaving to God, and the exact same thing happens. There is a type of misery we go through when our heart breaks, when we actually understand how profoundly we've hurt people. This is why we go through teshuva every year, because it's like peeling the layers off of an onion. We can't deal with the really bad stuff until we've dealt with the bad stuff, and we can't deal with the bad stuff until we've dealt with the uncomfortable stuff. So each year we go through this process, and then hopefully one of these years we can get to the stuff that we've actually done that we have deliberately forgot about. And that's the dark night of the soul, is unflinchingly looking at that. Judaism has the wisdom of doing it every year over the course of a lifetime. The monastic tradition did it much more quickly. The prophets, I believe, are a reflection of that much more quick process, that the idea of being able to see a larger truth in the universe, whatever that means that you have to know who you are. And if you know who you are, you might be going a little crazy. And that's oftentimes why we get that idea of a little bit on the edge craziness among the prophets. It's the process of being completely honest with yourself. I'm not completely honest with myself. I actually don't know of anyone who is. That'd be pretty terrifying to be in the presence of someone who was so self-aware that they fully understood everything that they'd done and were capable of. I think that's probably as close to a tzaddik as I would ever meet. I know that I'm not even close to it, and I've never met anyone who is.
Okay, so this was not uplifting at all.
But that was a relatively collected answer for me. That was relatively compact.
It's not getting any better. Let's talk about suicide.
Oh, great.
So, the question or the comment was, and I think that's really important. You made a drasha about suicide, and talked about grief, and how you also gave this example that a lot of times, like if you go to the person that lost someone through suicide, that it's not important that you say something spectacular, but that you're just there, and your presence is comfort. Yeah. And so the comment was that this COVID made this grieving process really difficult. Yeah. Because how can we be with those who are grieving when we can't go there? Yeah. Or as a grieving person to grieve on your own because people can't come to you. And I think this is really difficult, which also is not just about grieving, but also about suicide in general. And we lost, I think, I don't know if there are studies already, but I believe that we lost a lot of people also during the pandemic, during lockdowns, who had mental disorders, who couldn't reach out or who weren't helped.
Yeah. Yeah. When this question came in, I've thought about it for weeks now, and part of me just has to admit that that might be one of the reasons why I've stepped away from being a congregational rabbi. I left the congregational part of the rabbinate during COVID, and I'm part of. We talk about the Great Resignation happening in Anglo countries right now. It doesn't seem to be happening as much in Germany. But we talk about this Great Resignation, and the hidden thing is it's happening among my colleagues, both Jewish clergy, but also clergy of other religions. And part of the reason is because there's a very natural. So I have a type of a social terror, which no one would ever know because people think that I'm all extrovert and everything. I'm actually very introverted, and I have a deep social anxiety, which makes pastoral visits for me very challenging. And so I've gone to hospitals to visit people and sat out in my car for an hour trying to get to the place where I was able to step in. And that's just, you don't have a choice when you're congregational clergy. You make that visit. And then my mom's words, and that's something that this person was referring to earlier in their email, my mom's words when my friend committed suicide all those years ago was, doesn't matter, you don't have to know the right thing to say, you just go there, you be present. And I used my mom's words over and over again. Doesn't matter what's going on in your ego right now, go up to the hospital room because that's more important than your own anxiety. And that got me through every one of those visits. Well, I have a hard time hearing people on the phone, so you add that anxiety to then calling people on the phone, and you make phone and Zoom now the primary way that you're talking with people. And the reality is, I don't think anyone's figured out how to do this yet. And that's exactly it. It's wearing us out. It's one of those reasons that we're just hoping that maybe Omicron being less deadly than previous versions means that we're finally on our way out, and we kind of look at this as a flu and get a yearly shot or whatever the case is going to be. I'm not going to get into a COVID technology sort of thing, but one of the things is there's a point where we hit the balance between the lives that we are saving through our measures and the lives that we are losing because we don't have human contact anymore. And anyone who was with me in England knows that I was as strict as there was as a congregational rabbi on how we locked down. But everything that I wrote as far as an operating procedure or a position document always said, when we come to the place where COVID is roughly of the same efficacy as the flu, or we've got amount to deal with it that roughly puts it at the same risk as the flu, we don't close down synagogues for the flu. So when it hits that place, and I know that people would really argue with me that, and that's fine. Anyone who wants to have the debate on that, I'm fine. But I always wrote that because there gets to a point where we have to understand that humans need contact, if nothing else, then that we need to grieve. And so the answer to that question is twofold. Number one is there isn't an answer to it. We are communal creatures, even those of us who are introverts, even those of us who live in the middle of a village in the middle of nowhere, we still desperately need human contact. And I think we just have to acknowledge what that means and then start adding that to the discussion. We're past pandemic, we're now an endemic. And so if that's the case, what does that mean? And what does life look like? And I'm not advocating for one thing or another, other than advocating for the full conversation for exactly this purpose. Not a scientist. It doesn't matter how much I read. I'm not the authority on that one, but I am a longtime pastoral counselor and a congregational rabbi, and I know that I could not help people. The people who lost people, I could not help them, not in the way that I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so that's the answer to the question, that we need to take soberly and seriously how much we're losing at this point and find a way to balance that out. There is another answer to the question, because that's not helping anyone right now. And the other answer to the question is to give the power to the person who's in grief. And by doing that, when we are trying to help someone who has lost someone, we ask them, and we put the question out there, understanding that they might not be capable of answering that question at that point. But we ask the question and say, what is it that I can do that would be most helpful for you under the circumstances? And I tried to ask that whenever I could, whenever it was possible. Most people were not capable of knowing what that was. But if you get that question out there, at least it's there. And then you don't have to push. There's no reason to push. It's just like the entire mourning process of letting the person talk. But keeping that line up there that, okay, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to call you once a week. What I think I'm going to do is send you a text just saying, thinking of you. If that's helpful, let me know. If it's not, let me know. And if you don't know, then don't worry about it. I'm going to try different things. So if we have put ourselves in a position of helping that person and that thing, if that mitzvah has come to us for that person, then the answer is give them as much opportunity without hounding them into, I mean, again, the more text that I get, the more closed up I get. So everyone's different and everyone's needs are different. But offering them the opportunity to say, you know what I really need is to be left alone, but please check in on me once a month and I might change my mind. Or what I really need is I need a phone call every day. Even if it's 5 minutes, I just need to hear your voice. Or you know, I need to get flowers and a bottle of champagne on occasion. Whatever the case may be, have we asked someone else what it is they need? And that's the entire idea between Jewish mourning is we don't assume that what I would need is what someone else would need.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really complicated in regards to Judaism has a process of mourning.
Yeah.
And if you,
Yeah.
I mean, sitting Shiva is the purpose is that you concentrate on the mourning and everyone else takes care of the rest.
Yeah.
Like that you go to the house of the mourner and you give them, bring food and you just talk and drink tea or coffee or whatnot. And COVID and the pandemic is really the complete opposite of it.
Yeah. So a story I had always intended, had I remained in congregations, to do to set a new starting line. And what it means is this. I once counseled a friend, this is years ago, who had gone through as random of an unbelievable loss of their fiance as I've ever seen. Just one of those things that you can't believe that just happened in that way. And we're talking two people in the absolute prime of their life in every way you can possibly imagine. And then, I mean, it was literally someone who went out in a boat to spread their father's ashes and got hit by a bigger boat when they were doing it and was killed. So, I mean, just a sort of random. And I knew this person well enough, an amazing human being, gifted teacher, gifted human being, so intelligent, just wonderful. And you could just tell that who could know how to mourn in that situation? This wasn't a Jewish person. And one of the reasons Judaism has the wisdom of what we do is because not only do we usually not know how to mourn, but we usually don't want to. And so we put ourselves into a situation of obligation to take us through the best wisdom given the situation. And then we find that we've gone through the mourning process in spite of ourselves. And this person, maybe it was 5 or 6 or 7 years after the death of their fiance, I'd had a very tearful, long conversation with them. And I had them sit Shiva. And so they did a modified Shiva for 3 days. And it was very formal. Contacted all of their friends to tell them what they were doing, to describe, since most of their friends weren't Jewish, what the process was, and went through sitting on the floor, sitting low, covering the mirrors so, you know, it's not superstitious, so you don't look at yourself and see how puffy your eyes are, going through all the photos, making yourself cry, having people coming in and bringing the food, the entire process. And guess what? It worked. Their lives transformed because of the work that they did, because of the work their community did, not because of my good advice. Good advice is meaningless if it isn't the right advice for the right person, the person isn't willing to work forward with it. That was literally what I'd started thinking about personally as a congregational rabbi, was each of the people who had lost someone, spending time with them when all lockdowns were over, and suggesting, whether communally or individually, that especially people who were clearly not getting past where they were, to then sit Shiva, to reset it, to say, hey, everyone, lockdown is completely over. I need my community. I haven't mourned properly for my husband, wife, son, daughter, friend, you know, whatever the case may be. And so I'm going to do it now. And that's the answer that I think that I'm going to give out to the world, is when we have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah in its completeness and we know inside of ourselves that we have not been able to go through the mourning process, then I think that we go through the mourning process with a little bit of a hiatus in it. It actually does work. The wisdom remains the wisdom. And there it is. And I know who asked the question. If you're out there, I hope that this has helped you a little bit. But I know that from other comments from other people that this is one of the bigger things that the community is thinking about as well. Because is there anyone out there who hasn't lost someone during this time, whether to COVID directly or, we've put everything on hiatus for a couple of years. You and I have put our lives in many ways on hiatus, from not having a honeymoon to, whatever the case may be. And that's a really simple and silly thing. But, there's a lot of people who have put their lives on hiatus. The kids who have grown up with this, they will need to reset some things. And I hope that we as a society have the wisdom to have those honest conversations on what that is. I think this is probably going to be our last question of the day because we're getting past that hour standpoint. We can ask the next questions the next day. But I think we need to start thinking in terms of how far we're going to go down a path of no contact and when the returns are diminished for what we do. This is not an anti-vax statement. I'm vaxxed and boosted and am as careful as anyone gets for a variety of reasons, and was a huge proponent of the opening measures. But if we don't have an honest conversation of what this means to have something endemic instead of a pandemic, then we're going to never mourn in a way that we're able to move past it. We're only able energetically as humans, as spiritual beings, to mourn for a finite amount of time. And then after that, it starts eating at us. And so at some point, we need to recognize that we have not mourned in a way that's dealt with all of our burden of mourning and do something. And the wisdom of Judaism, I will always hold up there and say the way that Jews mourn in the most traditional way actually works.
Yep.
I don't know if that's the high note that we wanted to end on, but, maybe the high note is this, the hope that we're either lifting up or tearing down. That means we're trying to be constructive instead of destructive. So we can complain about everything that's going on around us. But anyone out there who's a member of a synagogue community, here's what we do. Call the meeting together and say, on Zoom if it has to be, and say, let's start talking about what this looks like to deal with the most serious things that we have now suffered from not being able to touch another human being, not being able to hug someone, not being able to be in the same room with them, not be able to be comforted. Let's start having those discussions about what does it look like. Start with the ends in mind. Stephen Covey, let's visualize it. Let's say on day X, when we are going to have the doors open, whether we're masked, whether we all have to be boosted, whatever, I don't care. That's not the discussion. But the day that we are back in the place where we say we're going to perform our ritual as we need to perform our ritual, let's have that meeting so we can start discussing it, what that looks like, and start visualizing that, putting that out there. We are so excited. When day X comes, we are going to do these things, and look how beautiful and constructive that is. And now all of a sudden, we're not looking to what the new numbers are from new infected cases tomorrow. Instead, we're looking at what does our community, what does our family, what does our school look like as we begin to either get past this or learn to live with it as part of the world as it is. So maybe that's the little light that I can offer, is that we as humans are powerfully able to overcome. And by visualizing life as normal, even if it's not quite as normal, we start making it normal again. And with that, I think that's it for this time. Thank you all for being a part of BeitVirtuali. And tell a friend. If you are not a subscriber to this channel, just click the subscribe button and like it and send it and put it on your social media page. Whatever the case may be, we need your help to keep growing and to keep out here. But more than that, we'd love to hear your comments. We'd love to see you at one of our classes. And we'd love to hear your questions and talk about what you are thinking about right now. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.
Bye.